Welcome to Wrist Swap. My name is Harrison. Today we're starting a brand new series called Let's Open It Up, and we're going to feature an Invicta Pro Diver, which has inside of it a Seiko NH35. If you don't know the history of movements, essentially the NH35 is the base level reliable movement from Seiko that is in most automatic micro brands that are at affordable price, as well as big brands that are also at affordable price. So we want to look at it. We want to basically just break it down. I'm not going to give you my thoughts on whether or not I think it's reliable based on the way that it's built. I'm just going to talk through how it's built. You can make whatever inferences you want based on what you see on the video. I'm going to do it relatively quick on this. If you guys want to see a full video, just tell me afterwards. But I want to make them relatively short so that they're consumable, so that you can see them relatively quickly and get the information that's kind of important and interesting. All right, so we're looking at the Invicta Pro Diver today. First thing I want to do is just open it up. So this is a glance at the movement itself as it's closed. Please ignore all the smudges and fingerprints and whatnot. I've taken this unit apart and put it back together probably about 3 times now before I started recording it, and it's not going to look pristine for that reason, so just keep that in mind. This one's water resistant, so what's going to happen here is when I take off the case back, which I'll do in a split second thanks to editing. If you listen to it, I don't know if you can hear it. I'll hold it up to the mic. So that sound right there is it winding. That's one of the things that Seikos in general when I've used them. So this is, if I haven't already said, a Seiko NH35A. NH35 is a really popular, reliable workhorse movement, but one of the sounds there is one of the things that people have talked about when it comes to Seiko, and it's one of the things that have, I guess, bothered people in the past, so I'm going to talk through exactly why it does that a little later. This right here is the setting lever. It's hooked into the crown. It's what holds it in place. So I need to push on this end here, and that allows me to take that crown out. So I just pull the crown right out. That way I can get the movement out of the case. Otherwise, you can't get the movement out. The crown's holding it in place. So there's the gasket. That's what keeps it waterproof. So that just fell off. You probably saw it earlier. I'm going to flip it over and take it out of the case itself. And then I'll flip through real quick here, just taking the hands off. I set them first so that they all lined up, and then I could easily just pop the hands off with some hand levers. So those were all off. Again, magic. The hands are going to disappear here in a second. I used Delrin tip tweezers for that, plastic tipped, and that allows me to avoid scratching the dial. Not that it matters in this case, but so I took the dial off, and this is one of the things about Invicta that I thought was really interesting. They have applied numerals, which is really something that people talk about as being, nice or high-end on some models. Invicta has applied indices on their models, and I've always wondered exactly how they do that. And the way that they do that is they essentially have basically rivets, it looks like, that go through holes in the dial, and then they've glued them in place. And they have obviously a couple rivets for the larger pieces and one rivet for the smaller ones, and that allows them to make sure that it's aligned in the correct places. And then, like I said, they glue it in place. So if we just look at the movement here to start, first thing that we're going to do is just take off the automatic rotor there. So that rotor spins, and that's what gives the watch charge essentially. So I'm taking off the rotor here. It's just a screw. So when people talk about a signed rotor on a movement, that's something that is nice. I remember thinking that pretty early on, and the signed rotor is usually just as simple as figuring out the rotor mechanism and the gear underneath. And then it usually just screws on to movements, especially in the case of the Seiko. That's all it does. And that rotor engages with a gear here that I'm going to end up turning to show you how that works. So right here, what I'm pointing out are the magic lever systems. So they're called like paw levers. And so as I work it here, you'll see how those levers are alternating. They're basically the way that they're gripping this ratchet. And you can see the teeth on that ratchet are super small. And that's what makes that sound when you listen to a Seiko. Those teeth, along with, if you look at the bottom there, you'll see a spring that's kind of just like rotating. Or I'm not really rotating, but clicking into place. That's the click spring, and I'll show you that a little later as well. But you can watch as I rotate this, how that wheel is turning in the end. So one wheel is turning, the paws are turning the small teeth on that ratchet wheel, and then that is turning, it's not really the ratchet wheel, but it's turning that intermediate wheel, which then turns the actual ratchet wheel. The ratchet wheel is what's on top of the barrel there. At least that's the name for it. So it's turning that wheel on top of the barrel there. The barrel has another spring. You can see it kind of running along the length, and that's holding it in place so that it doesn't unwind back the other direction. The paws also do the same thing, but that's kind of the really cool part about Seikos and the way they're invented is that system right there allows them to be bidirectional rotors. So whether the rotor's spinning clockwise or counterclockwise, they both charge up or wind up the mainspring. So I just took off a bridge there. That bridge is holding down those levers. They're really, really, really thin. And it also provides a jewel for the top of that wheel, that small toothed wheel that we were turning earlier. So that jewel obviously allowing it to rotate and not get gummed up, and it gives it some oil so it will last longer without a service. One of the things I should have done before I took that bridge off was take the balance complete out. So that balance cock is holding the balance complete, which is complete with the shock system and the jewels themselves, as well as the balance and the hairsprings. Once I take that screw out you just saw and this wheel off the top, those two are essentially what's winding the watch. And so now I'll take the bridge off as well. The main bridge there that is probably the most complicated part of this watch and separates it from a lot of other watches, other than the movement architecture, is this bridge. So the bridge itself, you can see some of the jewel assembly there. The focus isn't perfect, but you can kind of see the magic lever system. You can see some of the small gears that are acting as intermediates. You can see that pod gear thing has basically a shaft that extends through the bridge, and it's held in place by a basically like a semicircle that is basically affixed, friction affixed to it. That piece right there is the fourth wheel. And it's attached to the escape wheel that you can't see right now. It's kind of underneath a couple pieces. That piece actually goes all the way through the dial and controls the second hand. I also removed the third wheel. This piece right here is the click spring and click. It's all one piece. Typically those are two pieces, but in this case it's one just thin sheet stamp piece of metal. And it actually is a pretty smart way of holding the unit in place and keeping that wheel from rotating backwards, just from the strength of that spring just sitting there, wedged, basically. So pretty ingenious and really inexpensive way to do it. Also easy to switch in and out. I just removed the barrel as well, which holds the mainspring that powers the whole watch. Right here, that's the escape wheel right there. And I can't really take it out because it's underneath what looks like, that's the center wheel that's underneath everything there. And it's held by what's essentially, because it's one screw, would be considered the center wheel cock or the center wheel bridge. It just depends on how you classify those based on how it's affixed. This piece right here, I really wanted to show you guys. So this is the keyless works. Usually this is on the dial side, or more often it is. In this case, it's on the movement side or the rotor side. So as I pull this out, you'll see that the setting lever is pulling out. This third position is the really interesting one. You'll see that big arm swinging into place. And that right there is swinging into the rim or the outside of that balance wheel, and that's what's stopping it from moving. So a hacking function on this watch is that small bolt type thing, or it looks more like a bearing. It slides into place and stops the rotor. And then you can see that there's the setting lever, which is tied into the crown that we talked about earlier. You've got another piece there that is holding the setting lever down. It's also providing the slots essentially for the setting lever to slot into as the watch gets into different settings. And then the yoke spring and yoke are behind it. I'm going to flip it over here to the dial side. We're doing everything really quickly here so that I can show you the main functions I think are interesting. This is one of the really cool parts. So Seiko in general uses plastic parts, and that's part of what is assumed that their high reliability is the fact that they use plastic parts, which need to be serviced less often. So right here, you'll see that the calendar works are operated by a plastic piece. So there's that metal piece there that is operated by the crown rotating. And when it rotates one direction, it pulls that plastic white star, which is in a sliding motion, essentially. It pulls it away from the calendar, which disengages it. And then when I rotate the crown the other direction, it pulls that star towards the calendar, which pushes it to rotate it one date forward. So that's why the crown will set the date one way, but not set it the other way. Pretty ingenious solution, frankly. So I'll take that bridge off the top and the screws that are involved. That plate there is holding down a lot of different things, and it also has the riveted star that engages with our date, quick set date function, which is right there. Although blurry, it's right there. And then the plate underneath it is holding down the other plastic part, which is that black circle wheel over there on the side. And that's what engages with the hour wheel. So as the hour wheel turns 24 hours, what happens is that black part or black wheel turns once every 24 hours and it pushes the date forward once. So that's right there will get caught in that calendar works, which is why you don't want to try and use the quick set date while that thing's engaged, because you run the risk of breaking most likely either the white piece, the teeth on the calendar wheel, or the black plastic wheel that is pushing the calendar forward as you're trying to use the quick set function. So as I lift up the calendar and the plate that's holding it, there's the black wheel that I was talking about. It was hooked onto that plate as I pulled it out. Then I can remove the hour wheel, which slides right over the cannon pinion. And once I pull that out, then I can also remove the minute wheel. That right there essentially is an intermediate wheel between the hour wheel and the black wheel that we were talking about earlier. And then the wheel next to the cannon pinion there is the minute wheel. So this is just more of the gears that are operated from the crown that kind of keep the whole thing functioning. So there are a lot of intermediate wheels on that keyless works, which is a little different, a little interesting. That's me removing the cannon pinion. That cannon pinion provides friction. It holds the center wheel in place. And so that's kind of important to try and tie the movement side to the motion work side. So that was the NH35 from Seiko. It had a lot of pieces in there that I was interested in that I thought were a little different. The plastic components was something I had heard about, but I hadn't seen what exactly were the plastic components and how they worked together. The white star, how it slid in and out and activating the calendar function, was really smart to me. And if you made it out of metal, it wouldn't have functioned long term because the friction of that against the base plate would have made an issue. So I thought that was really clever. And obviously very, very inexpensive, that piece to manufacture. But it obviously means that operating that quick set while you're in the middle of switching dates between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. is why you have commonly things break, typically either on the calendar wheel or the white star or the black piece, because they're all made out of plastic. The magic lever system, the paw system, I thought was really intelligent, but it explained why it makes that sound when you wind Seiko movements, because they all typically have that gear in there that has really fine teeth, and both components, both those paws and that gear, are really thin. And so it means that you get obviously a lot of reverberation and a lot of grittiness in there, and so that's kind of why you get that sound. But it was interesting to learn. One of the things I didn't mention in the video was that bridge that has the paw system on it. It also has the jewels for the train wheels, for the wheels that operate the whole watch, right? That control the barrel to the escapement mechanism in transfer of power, essentially. So those are some of the key components in the watch moving. And you can see that two of those, at least two of those, I didn't look in depth on all of them, had actual shock protection on them. So typically you'll see that shock protection on the balance itself, so that the hairspring has pivots that are in holes, and then they have leaf springs on either side so that pivot can move without actually breaking off the balance staff because they're not in a really tight hole. They've got room to kind of bounce up and down inside those end stones. And they have a similar mechanism on the train wheels, which I thought was really interesting and something that I hadn't seen on some of the other movements I've disassembled. So just another note that I thought was interesting. So this was really fun for me. I like learning how things operate and breaking them down. So I figured I'd share it with you guys. If this is something you guys like, please let me know, either in the comments, liking this. If you want to see more of these, I think I'm going to do a few more at least before I figure out how well they're doing. So please subscribe if you want to see more of those. I've got a few on the table that I know I'm going to do. And then after that, I'll just look and see if people are enjoying them and whether or not I want to keep doing it. Because it takes time, and obviously the movements are going to get more expensive. So I need to get better at what I do because I'm still an amateur, to make sure that I don't break them when I have to reassemble them. So any other tips or things you want to see included, please let me know as well. Till next time, take care.